and if as you see that now, and we've got and if you have any tech related questions, just actually chat those over to me directly, and you can just do that by clicking the drop down in the chat box. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the team to at least introduce themselves first, and then I'll continue with just an outline of the agenda for this hour. Turn it over to James.
Hi, everybody. James Valdez, he, him pronouns, and member of the PCEF startup team.
Janet.
Janet Hammer, she, her, member of the PCEF startup team. Happy to be with you today.
Thank you. And Katie.
Katie Lister, PCEF startup team, she, her pronouns.
Great. All right, one more slide and we'll jump into the content. Next slide. So today, just at a high level, this is really about, we sent out a large 104-page document when we first sent out the content. We know that was a lot. And we've since sent out a guidance, a link to a guidance that can help folks navigate that public comment based on sort of the areas. And so the areas of your interest, but we welcome folks to comment and review it all and give us feedback on it, as much of it as you're interested in. But what we want to do is we want to help you navigate and understand what exactly is within the documents that we've laid out. So we're going to focus our energy on helping you navigate, and what we'll do is when we turn it over at the end, after James sort of walks you through the navigation of our public comment documents, we're going to turn it over for folks to ask clarifying questions. And we want to make sure we give folks as much room as possible to ask clarifying questions first, so that, you know, as you turn back and you start digging into the documents, you feel you have what you need in order to give us appropriate feedback. And then after we get out of the way all the clarifying questions, we will go to actual comments that folks want to just share and offer. So that's the way we're gonna have the tail end of the conversation. And with that, I'll turn it over to James Valdez on the PCEF startup team.
Great, thank you, Sam, and thank you all for being here. We have a great turnout. I count 37 people in this meeting. So first, I just wanted to go over kind of some basics of the Portland Clean Energy Fund. We're not going to go into kind of the background and history, but recognize that, yeah, this program is a landmark in many ways as an initiative that was led for and by communities of color and was successfully passed in 2018. And now we're very excited to be launching into the implementation and making grants available. In the initiative that passed, it sort of envisions 4 types of projects or funding buckets. And so broadly, those are clean energy programs, which includes things like renewable energy, energy efficiency, and weatherization in the places where people live, work, worship, and learn. Projects around green infrastructure and regenerative agriculture. And those are projects that are about the kind of natural systems of our cities and places that can help sequester carbon or reduce climate impacts. And that includes things like bioswales, tree planting, urban agriculture, and sustainable food systems. And then there's a bucket of funding that's allocated for contractor training and supporting workforce development. And this is recognizing that we need to diversify the workforce in the clean energy economy and really create a low carbon future that is inclusive of our social and racial goals within equity goals rather within PCEF and at the city, and also implement climate action. Then also recognizing that there's ideas out there that are focused on climate action and social equity, but they don't fit within these funding areas. There's a 5% allocation for innovation. And so that's the overall kind of types or categories of projects, but there's a lot of openness and flexibility within those. And wanted to share some of the trajectory of where we're at in terms of this funding round that we're looking to open in August of 2020, as well as the future. And so for this year, in this funding round that's opening up here in a couple months, we anticipate being able to put out $8 million worth of grant funds. And then for 2021 program year and beyond, we anticipate $40 to $60 million annually. And so we, as Sam have mentioned, as a team and as a PCEF grant committee, which is tasked with overseeing the grant allocation and process development, we've released the draft application questions as well as the scoring criteria for this first round of funding. And as you look through that, we want to talk about the different types of grants or some different thresholds that we've established as drafts with the committee, and help guide you through how you might look at some of the content that we've released for public comment. And so effectively, there's 3 types of grants that we put out application questions for and scoring criteria around. And those include project grants and planning grants. And within project grants, there's a threshold where we're looking at defining small grants as those projects that are below $200,000 worth of grant funds requested. And these grants would have the opportunity to spend that funding over a 3-year period. We're also have a vision for large grants, which would be grants between $200,000 and $1 million. And those grants would be able to spend that funding over 5 years. So as you think about your projects or ideas that you might have for projects, you might look to kind of see which of those 2 buckets that they fit into, because the scoring criteria and questions there's a lower threshold for small grants in terms of the number of questions and some of the depth of the questions that are requested. And so this will hopefully help you navigate as you provide input. We also have application questions and scoring criteria developed for planning grants. And so these are grants recognizing that some organizations are still in the early phases of putting an idea together for a PCEF project and need some time to do community outreach, to do technical evaluation and analysis. And those grants are going to be available for up to $100,000, but with the expectation that organizations and entities developing those spend that and engage in that process within a year. We also want to note that there are additional types of grants that we anticipate making available, but those are not part of the current public comment period. And so those include the application support grants, which is something we've talked about publicly and was approved by the committee and is pending City Council approval now, potentially tomorrow. And those are grants for up to $5,000 that we anticipate making available, and really focused on small organizations and organizations that serve marginalized communities with a particular focus on Black and Indigenous people. And so that's recognizing that especially very small organizations have a lot of different challenges that they're facing right now and need application support in terms of doing grant writing, engaging in community outreach, accessing technology that they might need to be able to collaborate in this space and world we're in with COVID and having to work remotely, and also to engage in and participate in trainings that we'll be making available or that might be available through other resources. And so this is really seen as capacity building grants for small organizations. Going forward into 2021, we also envision making available mini grants, which would be small grants that can be applied for in increments of up to $5,000 per organization. And this would be for doing events or attending workshops or engaging in grant activities or community outreach in small increments. And so we don't have a full framework for that yet, but we anticipate those being available in 2021. So I wanted to then, need to get over to my slide, talk about the content that you will see if you go through the application materials and scoring criteria. And so as Sam mentioned, the entire content is about 104 pages, and we recognize that all of you have a lot going on in your lives, and that this is a lot of content to work through. And so this is intended to be a bit of a navigation of where to find the information that you need in order to provide feedback to us and help us build this program as well and as equitably as possible. So in general, the scoring and public comment, application scoring and public comment draft has an overview about PCEF and then goes into the different sections of grants. And so that includes planning grants, small grants, large grants. And then there's also a section that's specific to projects that are seeking funding on workforce and contractor development grants. There's also then definitions and some appendices. So we are going to, right now, I'm going to switch and actually navigate you through the website so that you can see more kind of in real time how to find that information and how to, in a way, choose your own adventure through this feedback process. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and go to the screen that has our website. So you should be able to see here, and I'll try not to scroll too quickly. So this is our main landing page for the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund, or PCEF. And if you scroll down, you'll see this link here, which is about the public feedback on the application questions and grant criteria. We've developed a navigator or guide, which you can access by clicking here. And then this goes through the types of grants that we'll be making available. And so this is what I just shared with you about the planning grants, small grants, large grants, workforce and contractor development grants, which we have different sections for broken out in the document that we've released. And then we provide some guidance around how projects will be scored. And this is intended to help individuals and organizations understand kind of how decisions will be made by the committee in terms of what projects actually get funded. And so the process for that envisions first a initial eligibility screen. Effectively, is the organization eligible to apply? Is it a nonprofit that is both federally eligible and also registered with the Secretary of State? Then, if needed, projects will go through a technical review that then will move on to the scoring. And so scoring has different categories for different elements that the committee has broken the questions into, and that the questions are really responding to. And there's also different weighting for different elements of that scoring. And so that process of the weighting is articulated a little bit more here. And you can see the point, there's 100 points possible. The thickness of these different categories indicates kind of the total possible points per that category. And then there's also weighting within criteria. And so when you look at the scoring document, which is providing the guidance of how the committee and evaluators will actually rank projects and allocate these points, I'll show you kind of where those weighting elements are contained, because that's a huge part of which projects will be funded. And so in general, the categories that those points kind of fall into is questions and scoring around organizational capacity, questions around project description and scope, questions around the environmental benefit, the social benefit, economic benefit, and the budget. I'll also note that while social and racial equity is not called out as a specific category of scoring, it's embedded throughout the different categories. And we really are asking questions about who's going to benefit, what are the populations and people that are going to be both receiving the benefits of the project as well as engaging in the workforce and getting the jobs. And so these are key elements of everything that the Portland Clean Energy Program is about. And so we're asking questions throughout. I'm now going to kind of navigate you through what this actually looks like. So this, if you were to click, I'll scroll up not too quickly. If you were to click here, it would bring you to the questions. I'm sorry, the questions. And this is the questions of what would be on an application for a planning grant, and the questions that a nonprofit organization seeking to apply for funds would fill out. And so this lets you see in some detail what that would be. And then the scoring guidance is how the reviewers would be allocating the points. And so this category here that you see, the second cell over that says possible points, that's where this weighting concept comes into play, where some questions and some elements have different scoring weights. And so that is intended to help you kind of navigate, and we're seeking feedback in the survey about these different elements of whether the questions are appropriate, whether they're answerable, and whether the scoring allocation is fair. And so with that, I'm going to actually switch back to the PowerPoint, and then we'll have a lot of time, hopefully, for some questions and answers. Also just want to note that in addition to social and racial equity goals, addressing climate and articulating how projects do meet climate goals is another key piece, and there's questions that are embedded throughout as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you for sticking with me here. And back here. Okay. So I forgot to, on the website, show you where to click to actually see the survey, but that that's a part that's highlighted on a couple different parts of our website. And the survey exists as a SurveyMonkey form that you can click through. We're also, that survey is available to download if you want to see it all at once. And also just noting that to provide us feedback, you don't have to take the survey. You're welcome to reach out via email and send us your thoughts. You're welcome to call the PCEF phone line and record an audio message for that, or reach us directly. And you can even print out the PDF of the survey filled in by hand if you need to, and mail it. We're open to feedback in any way possible. In general, the survey is broken into different sections, which track to the different types of grants. So that's planning grants, small grants, large grants, and workforce and contractor development grants. And those elements are ones that you can click through. If you are not interested in providing feedback on one element of that, you're welcome to just skip it and kind of move on to the sections that you do want to provide feedback on. We're also asking questions about the process itself, whether the feedback process is meeting the goals and whether it's easy enough to navigate. And then we are seeking some information about you as an individual or you as an organization, and some of your interest in Portland Clean Energy Fund project types or categories. And then we're also looking to collect information about the demographics, either of you as an individual, or if you're filling out the survey on behalf of an organization, of who your organization serves. And so that's really to ensure that we as a program are meeting our equity goals and that we're getting feedback from the populations that could most benefit from this. So in general, we're seeking to know whether the questions are clear on the application, whether you as an organization could answer the questions, and whether the allocation of points, that weighting concept that I talked about, whether that is fair and whether we're on track generally in terms of what we're prioritizing. So we're almost ready for Q&A, and just wanted to share where we are in terms of our timeline and development. And so right now we're in the open period for the public comment. And then we're, as Sam mentioned, extending that until not this Friday, but next Friday until June 26th. And so then we'll be collecting that feedback and providing it to the grant committee, which then will be reflecting on that feedback and making modifications if needed to the grant questions, as well as the scoring criteria and weighting. And then we'll be releasing the RFP for the first round of funding on August 10th. Then the application window will be open for about 2 months, 60 days, ending on October 9th. And then we'll be processing all the applications and going through that review, and throughout the fall, really doing the analysis and elements of ensuring that we can select a great first round of projects for the Portland Clean Energy Fund. I did want to note that one element of that I should have spent a little bit more time in the process piece is that there will be the opportunity for reaching out to organizations and if there's clarifying questions that are needed on an application. And so that will be part of that review process too. There is the opportunity for outreach and response from organizations. Then in December, we anticipate being able to go forward to the Portland City Council with the recommended list of grant awardees, and then being able to announce those and go through the process of award. This is a lot of work still ahead of us, and a lot of work in front of you all as organizations too, if you're interested in funds from the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And just also wanted to note an element that we'll be releasing some more guidance on soon, which is that entities that engage in grants need to be registered as what's known as vendors with the City of Portland. And that's a process that any organization or business can do even ahead of time. So we'll be releasing some guidance soon about how to become a vendor with the City of Portland, but this is a process that can take 6 to 8 weeks. And so we really encourage organizations that are interested in Portland Clean Energy Fund or other opportunities with the City of Portland to register as vendors. And so registering as a vendor doesn't obligate the city to engage in a grant or in business activity, but it just is a registration step that will save time in the whole process. And so also, as we look to get out the application support grants, that's another key element of the timing. So we'll be moving on to questions here. And I know I've covered quite a bit there, and Sam, feel free to jump in if you want to add some more. But we're hoping that the last half of this meeting can really be a dialogue first about clarifying questions about the process of providing feedback to Portland Clean Energy Fund. And then if we have time, then more comments about the actual content itself. So feel free to either use the raise hand function in the participant tab, or you can write your question into the chat box, and Sam and I will monitor and read them back. And you can also, if you raise your hand, we can call on you. And I see Alan Lee. So yeah, go ahead, Alan. Feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. So I expect there will be a lot of scrutiny of this program, and it's going to be really important in the first year to get off to a good start and get good public reaction to it. I guess kind of a couple related questions on the applications, which I haven't looked through the forms and everything yet, but I'm just curious if you are including something to ensure there's sort of no double dipping on other program incentives, and if there's something about potentially about co-funding. And then my other question is, do you have plans for evaluating the performance of each program to ensure that they're meeting their goals and delivering what they committed to?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. And so yes, well, I'll start with your first question about kind of co-funding. There are questions on the application for small and large grants that are about kind of what other funding is being brought to the project. However, there's not a requirement that projects have what's known as leverage or other co-funding. It's an element of scoring, but it's not a requirement. And so projects could seek funding that's exclusively from Portland Clean Energy Fund to implement the project, or it could be a partnership with other funding. And so and also organizations are eligible to apply for potentially, multiple types of projects. So there could be an organization that applies for a clean energy project and also a green infrastructure project. There definitely is a reporting and oversight element of Portland Clean Energy Fund as a whole, and the financial and performance audit that we will be doing as we roll out funding. And you're absolutely right that the program will be under a lot of scrutiny. So We will also have reporting elements required for all grantees, and so we don't have that as part of the public input and feedback at this point, but it's definitely a part that we're developing in terms of what grantees will be reporting in terms of the performance. And so, yeah, just note that, you know, we have been working also with a lot of other grant makers, other entities that provide both public and private grants, and have been learning and adopting best practices from those organizations too. I'm seeing quite a few questions coming in.
James, maybe just I'll add into Alan, but I would, as you look through it, I would probably look through the large grant scoring criteria. As you look through, think about that question around that idea around, are we accurately capturing whether benefits are additional? Do you feel like that's accurate, that's clearly there? Because that is an important piece. We want to make sure we're leveraging additional funds, but we want to make sure what we are doing is additional. So
yeah, very good point. I see, let's see, I don't see any more hands raised, but I see quite a few questions in the chat box. A question from Suzanne of how can we find out if we are registered as a vendor with the city? I can send a link to that and put it in the chat box, but we will be providing some more guidance as well of how to become a registered vendor. Maybe we can go to the next question. I can quickly get the link for you.
Yeah, and what I'll say about that question is, Suzanne, we do plan on emailing out later this week around just that guidance that folks that are interested in PCEF or any other city program, it's worthwhile for them to register as vendors. And as we do that, we'll make sure we include instructions in there to see if there's an easy path to check if folks are registered vendors already. If you already receive any city grant funds, any city funds, you would be a registered vendor, just at a high level.
Yeah, I'll drop the link to, which is a very basic link of where this information lives within what's known as the Bureau of Revenue and Financial Services, but just know we'll be providing some more guidance here in the near future. So
next question, we've got James Hammerland has a question about groups partnering. James, it may be great if you want to unmute yourself if you just want to elaborate on that question.
Sure, I'm Jeff Hammerland actually, but I'm happy to be confused with James. That is an honor. So my question, yes, and James answered it partially, but he was focusing more on funds coming from other sources. My question is, let's say if Group A, Group B, and Group C want to partner on a project. Would it be best or to have a joint application, or could we potentially have 3 applications that reference the others in terms of how we want to see our piece fitting into that broader mosaic? Just to give an example, to give some, to ground the question a little bit. Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, one of the groups I'm involved with, if we wanted to focus on the churches, synagogues, facilities within a given neighborhood, but we wanted to partner with other groups working on that neighborhood, would that be possible? Would that require each of us going with separate applications, a group application? Any guidance on that?
Yeah, very, very good question. I think we probably don't want applications coming in that are duplicating efforts.
No,
so
but they're part of a coherent whole that had been organized and thought through in advance. But how to present that in a way that is not confusing to the selection committee.
If I could just interject, can you all hear
Katie,
me?
Go for it.
Yeah, this is Katie Lister with the PCEF team, and you would there can only be one applicant and one grantee, so there needs to be a lead with it, at least for the purposes of paperwork and contracting and things like that. So there are questions in the application that ask about the partnership, ask about partnerships, and ask about coalitions. So there's opportunity to sort of describe the structure, whether it's really even if it's sort of very lateral and very equitable in terms of its power sharing and work that's going to be implemented, the city still does need one lead applicant to be the grantee and to have contracts with.
Does that answer your question, Jeff?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's an emerging question.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that helps. And I mean, it could still be. I mean, it sounds like it could be either or. Still, it could be one grant that includes a number of partners with one group, with one of the partners being the lead for accountability purposes, let's say. But there could also be maybe 3 different grants with 3 separate leads, but all talking about how they hope to collaborate in this more comprehensive approach in, say, a given neighborhood. Is that correct?
I think that it could be. It might be more difficult in terms of sort of the review process and scoring that. If what you're doing is truly one project,
yeah,
then I think our preference would be to have that one project be kind of captured in one scope with one set of deliverables and one set of reporting requirements. But if you think that creates issues or barriers for different groups in the community who are interested in putting projects together, we'd be interested in kind of hearing about why that might be.
Yeah, and I can talk about that. I've been involved in some federal grants with some groups, and I'm familiar with the pros and cons of what complications. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that. But I think it is an interesting question, and it's one of those things, because what you guys are doing. And by the way, excellent presentation, everybody. Thank you so much. But we're tilling new ground here. You guys are tilling new ground here. And some of these things like this might be, one of the things I'm really appreciate is your desire to be flexible and meet the real needs of the community. I really appreciate that, while still staying within the constructs of what the city can allow. So I really appreciate that. But this is one of those things that might be requiring a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly, that is key to our values, is making sure that we are responsive to the needs of community here.
We've got,
I have a follow-up. I think Kelly Haynes has a follow-up question to this, and then we'll go back up in the chat just a little bit. So
I'm good.
Kelly, do you want to jump in?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Jeff, for the question. I think I had a similar one around if there's a partnership with the projects themselves. So taking Jeff's question around maybe, retrofitting or upgrading a bunch of facilities with maybe a group of employers who are doing the work, and then a second application around the workforce development piece and the training, and then saying that, those training investments will lead to a pipeline of workers that will then get hired by those contractors to work on those projects. It feels like it could easily be 2 different applications with 2 different leads, one leading on the workforce side and the other leading on the projects, but that they're coordinating so that those people actually get hired on the PCEF projects. Is that, I don't know if Jeff, that's kind of what you were implying, but that's sort of how I've been thinking about this. And then there's coordination there. So you're investing in the training and then getting those people the jobs on the actual projects.
Yeah, sorry, this is Katie, and I don't know, Kelly, if there was a question there, but that's a really good example. And that is an example of that's an example where I can imagine that those feel like relatively distinct efforts. And they would actually probably, each of those applications might score better because there is this sort of connection with a strong partner that leads to one of the kind of intended outcomes of the program. So in the case that you were talking about, actually like placement on a work site for folks leaving a training program.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, maybe the only other thing I would add is that if one is dependent on the other, if the project would only work if both were funded, then it probably makes sense for them to be a single application. But this is something I think we should talk more about as a team and with the committee of like what that guidance we provide in terms of partnership is. But we want to really allow for a lot of creativity and new partnerships to emerge. And so, yeah, I think there's a balance there.
So I think as you have these questions, it is, I would say, bringing them back to just certainly dig through the scoring criteria. I would say, and for those two questions in particular, I'd say focus on the large grant scoring criteria and just see whether those connection points exist.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
I think we had Gail Palmer was.
Do you want to read the questions then?
Yeah. So Gail Palmer, this question: what types of outcomes are envisioned by the committee from the planning grants? Coalition building, community building, or other outcomes leading to an implementation project?
So yeah, I think, Gail, thanks for the question. And all of those outcomes are envisioned. I think planning grants are an opportunity for organizations to do some of that partnership building, also some technical analysis if needed, to understand what they would want to apply for either a future large or small project grant. And so that can be, I think, around a variety of different needs. We're trying not to be too prescriptive, but the application for planning grants does ask questions around, who's intended to benefit, what are does the project being planned have a capital investment or physical investment element, and then it is intended to lead to an outcome that either an organization develops a project and then applies for future funding, or recognizes that that they're not ready, or that something is not viable. A planning grant doesn't necessarily need to result in a future application, but it will still have reporting requirements and measurement of what happened. So I'm not sure if that answers your question in terms of outcomes, but
yes, yeah, it does. I think that those are the kind of outcomes I would envision. So I was mainly asking for a reassurance that we were on the same track.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gail. Let's see. I see a lot of new messages coming in, but I'm trying to ask them sequentially. Was there a question from Rosa Martinez?
Yeah, it's a little bit farther down, James.
Oh, okay, I see. Is there a set goal of how many awardees will be in each category? Is there a maximum per awardee amount? So the maximum per awardee is, well, there's not a, for the first year, the maximum award is really kind of broken into what type of grant it is. And so the large grants, which are between $200,000 and $1 million, would be kind of the largest award eligible. But there's not a maximum that's been determined in terms of the kind of total amount going into future years, though there is an element of organizational capacity and budget that will be reviewed. And I'd note that in the small grant category for grants under $200,000, there is there are points that are additionally given if it's a smaller organization. And so that's not to guide, we're not intending to say that small organizations can't apply for large grants, but there's an element of organizational capacity that will be looked at, but there's no hard limits in terms of, what a organization's budget is versus what they apply for.
Maybe to put a finer point, because there may be this follow-up, James, is that So just to be clear, the maximum for a specific grant application is $1 million, but an organization could be part of multiple grant applications in different capacities. And so an organization isn't necessarily individual. There's no cap on what an organization may receive. There's just a cap on the maximum a particular grant award may be for year one.
Yeah. Another piece that I think we can share on is that there was a preliminary allocation of funding for planning grants by the committee, but I am just not
1.5 million.
Okay, that's right. 1.5 million for planning grants. So depending on how many planning grants there are and how much is requested by different organizations for planning grants, that would be kind of the upper maximum. Would be, I guess, 15 of those planning grants. But yeah. Or that would be the minimum number of grants that are awarded. Sorry. So yeah, I'm getting a little lost in the chat order because I
think it's Ted Lab had the next question.
Ted, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. My question sort of follows on Jeff's earlier about partnerships. Our group does a lot of partnerships, and we work often with many partners on grants and projects. And we love partnerships because every partner brings something different to the table and brings a different perspective. And often city grant programs like the BES Community Watershed Stewardship Program and some of the grants that go through the neighborhood association or the neighborhood coalitions encourage that. But in the last couple of years, there's been this countervailing force from the city attorney's office, whereby there's these increasing requirements put on grantees to collect and document insurance liability information for all of the partners, not just the project lead, but all of the partners. And so there's an extent to which it feels like increasingly we're being punished by having many partners. I want to bring that to your attention. I don't know if you've had conversations with the city attorney about that. There is a movement afoot by community-based organizations to start to push back on that with city council, because I think city council has not become aware of the challenge. And so my question to you is, have you thought about that challenge, and have you thought about trying to ease that pathway for new organizations? I'm thinking, I mean, this is a burden on a group like ours that's over 10 years old and had done many of these projects. And I'm just thinking for new organizations or ones that have never applied for a city grant before, it's going to be a daunting challenge. So I just want to know how you're thinking about that. Thank you.
Pam, do you mind if I respond?
Yeah, go for it, Kate.
Yeah.
So hi Ted, this is Katie, and we have had and continue to have conversations with the city attorney, risk management, and procurement related to insurance requirements in the city. And we don't have any kind of really firm, easy answers yet, but we definitely are aware of the issue, and we are working to kind of create paths that both through including technical assistance that we know we will have to be providing to organizations just in terms of navigating getting insurance if they don't have it, and getting proper documentation if they don't have that easily, on hand. And then also having additional insurance requirements be an eligible expense for the project. So there's not an additional organizational cost that's not covered by the grant. So those two things we know we're going to do. But like I said, we are having these conversations with the city attorney and risk management and procurement to try and create an easier path. I would also just want to kind of recognize that we do want to make sure that our grantees are protected from the liability associated with taking a big financial hit. It certainly is a much bigger risk, this sort of smaller and less flush you are, it's easier for larger organizations to absorb those kind of blows. And so we do think that there will be kind of appropriate insurance requirements, but we're doing everything we can to kind of zero in on what appropriate means and create some more ease in the process.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And I would say too, thank you, Ted, for raising the I guess reality that this has been an issue, and also that there's work happening kind of between community-based organizations to elevate this issue, because I think we'd want to learn from the recommendations that community-based organizations are making as we do look to, hopefully make this something that organizations can participate in, and that we're not creating additional barriers. So.
No, I'm not hearing anything.
So I'm going to go ahead. We're going to move
to mute. Yeah.
We're going to go. Let's go ahead, and so we've got about 10 minutes left. We're going to move through some of these questions, try to move through them a little quicker, but we are also going to stick around till after noon for those who can hang with us. So I'm not sure if we can I think we may just try to move through these, recognizing that folks will have additional questions. So I think just to quickly
real quick,
yeah, sure.
Maybe if you have a question and have to leave at noon, maybe we can prioritize those, or I don't know if we have a way of doing that though.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. I think I think we may be able to move through these pretty quickly, and then and let's just come back and see where we're at.
All right, sounds good.
So just Evan, I think your question is a fairly easy one, so we can get that one out. It's, can an organization apply to multiple categories under one grant application? And the answer to that is yes. Suzanne, your question is, when will the reporting requirements be published? We're nervous about how cumbersome they will be. That will be published as part of the final RFP. And so I think that is an area, though, we welcome any feedback in terms of comparable reporting requirements you've seen in other programs within this feedback. Tina, one, do each of the partners have to be a City of Portland vendor? Can only one partner be a vendor? James or Katie, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that only one, the primary grant applicant has to be the vendor. They would have the subcontracts with the other partners on a project and be managing distribution of payments to those other contractors. But our relationship and primary vendor is with the primary grant applicant.
Yeah, the grant, I believe so. The grant award and grant agreement would be signed with the entity that's a vendor. We can provide more guidance on this though. So that is a good question that we'll put in our guidance on vendor registration. Then going down, I think we got Rosa's question. And then from Kate, Caron.
Hello.
Okay, the question is, it looks like a ton of work was put into developing scoring criteria and weighting. I worry that the weighting might be too nuanced to be easy to use for reviewers and might result in lots of applications that score very closely. Have you discussed these concerns, and are there process steps after scoring where the committee can shift the prioritized order of projects recommended for funding? So the answer is yes, and I should have gone into more detail about the scoring process, but there's the scoring, and then there's also balancing of the portfolio to meet various goals. And so, for instance, going back to this slide, this is kind of target allocations of the fund overall. There can be balancing year to year as well, but we want to ensure that overall we're meeting the intent of the legislation. Also, there's a requirement that at least 20% of the funds overall be allocated to organizations that have a track record of serving marginalized communities. And within the clean energy programs, there's a requirement that 50% of the funds directly serve low-income communities and communities of color. And so there will be review and balancing to ensure that those additional goals are met. Sam or Katie, did you want to speak to additional elements of kind of the process piece?
I don't know that I don't know that I have anything to add on the process piece. I would say that we have had some discussion about kind of the first question or the first statement about this concern that there might be some really tightly packed scores, particularly in the scoring criteria that are structured so that it's sort of, you receive points on a race to the top kind of approach. You know, if we get a bunch of applications that score really tightly to, are bunched really closely together, we don't necessarily want to give, you know, 0 points on one end and full points on the other end if they are in fact very near each other. So we do have a plan, kind of a plan B for the race to the top approach for the criteria, and for the overall for the overall score, the kind of overall score, there is not, we have had discussions but have not yet written out what an outcome might look like if everyone scored very closely together. Ultimately, I mean, at this point, they would still just be ranked according to score and sent to the full committee for discussion and recommendation, where the full committee can kind of make changes based on a set of criteria for portfolio balancing.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And I wanted to move to the next question, which is a pretty detailed one. And I think we can accommodate actually looking at this content. So I'm going to switch my screen to the element that you, so Lynn Lindgren Schroeder had asked, can you speak to the requirements of table W2 large grant scoring criteria, page 13? What is the difference between benefits and health insurance, paid time off, and retirement? There are two separate categories, but appear to overlap. So I'm going to switch my screen so that you all can see what Lynn is talking about.
And as you pull that up, I might chime, Janet, I know it may be worthwhile for you to unmute so you can chime in on this one. So you bring this up.
So I think I'm navigating down. I also should have noted that there are hyperlinks in the application and the table of contents, and you can skip in the large document to the section. So I think I might need to keep, okay, W3.
Yeah. It's W2. So
W2.
Sorry, go back.
Sorry.
This might actually
Right
be
there.
a simple question. And Lynn, I think, correct me if this is not the question you're asking, but I believe that the difference is that one of the scoring criteria relates to employees who are receiving prevailing wage, and the other one applies to employees who don't receive prevailing wage.
Lynn, did that answer your question, or?
Yeah, I see that now.
This is Janet, and I'll just chime in one other nuance with that. So there are questions about the organization, the applicant organization, and things that you do as an organization. And then there's projects that are capital projects, like you are doing green infrastructure, you're putting on a solar panel, you're weatherizing, and those have like labor elements. And in there's questions about whether folks get benefits. And that also does show up differently in that projects that are $350,000 or more and on a single site are in this draft, would be subjected to prevailing wage, which has a requirement for benefits, and but you might not be subject to the prevailing wage, but offer benefits. And so there's an opportunity to earn points for those good behaviors.
Okay, maybe just when you know, a little bit more text in the first category so that you don't get the question over and over. Although I see now that it's clarified in the second column. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Lynn. I'm going to go back to the presentation then, and then question from Michael Human to Katie's response to Kate Caron's topic. If there are more qualified applications than can be funded at a time, will you encourage these applicants to carry their applications forward to the second grant period? And yes, we do anticipate giving feedback to grant applicants who were not awarded. I don't think we'll automatically carry those applications forward. They would need to reapply into the next grant period, but certainly, yeah, we would encourage organizations that were not funded to either refine their application or resubmit it for a future period when, frankly, the $8 million allocation that we have this year, we just know we won't be able to fund everybody. And so the $40 to $60 million we have next year will provide a much broader range of opportunity.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, all the applications that meet the minimum technical viability or technical feasibility will be scored, and those scores will be public, and so those scores will be able to elevate and describe where folks either fell short on the scoring or whatever else. We do anticipate and expect that we will adopt the process for year 2, but it certainly provides the foundation for turning that and resubmitting an application amended or whatever else for year 2. And it may frankly not have to be amended. It may frankly be successful in year 2 just because there are more funds available.
And I put up on the screen kind of a more detailed timeline for year 1. So folks can see a little bit more of the resolution, but what this doesn't show is that also in November, December, we'll be getting ready for the second year worth of grant applications. We don't have, I guess this also goes to Marissa Johnson's question. We don't right now have a estimated timeline for release of those 2021 program year grants in that open window, but we'll be working on that over the coming months.
Okay. We're here to hang around because folks have lingered with some questions. But please, so we're gonna remain at least for another 10 minutes to the extent that folks have questions, and we can go longer. So please keep sending them. But if you certainly have to leave now or leave a couple. Have to have had left a couple minutes ago, please just go ahead and send a question and we'll try to prioritize those and let us know.
Yeah, if folks have, again, specific questions or feedback about the draft application questions or criteria and scoring, yeah, we're also open to hear that as well. So now we can do either clarifying questions or, I guess, content questions and feedback if folks would like. A question from Tina's at, do groups have to reapply to grants year after year? Is this a yearly basis application? I guess one element is that grant applications can be for multiple years of a project. So going back to the slide of the large and small grants can be up to 3 years total, and large grants can be up to 5 years total in terms of implementation. But to the application question, I think, after that period of performance ended, or, an organization would apply again, it wouldn't be automatically rolling into another grant cycle. I think that's maybe having to guess at your question a little bit, but feel free to clarify if you'd like, and talk to us. So. Hopefully that helped then. Other questions or feedback? There's still quite a few of you on here, so feel free, don't be shy.
Looks like Tina's got her hand raised.
Oh,
Tina,
yeah,
if you
yeah.
want to go ahead and just ask a question. I'll mute you.
Just to clarify, so
Can you come a little closer to the mic?
yeah, sorry, hold on. So we can the application itself can go, or the project itself can go from 3 to 5 years, but I didn't catch that last part where you said about the application process. Do we need to renew it every year, or do we just finish the 3 years and then we put in another application? Like if we end of
Right. So just to be,
can you repeat the question? I think it was
yeah,
Sam. It was a little quiet, but yeah.
So the question was, the application itself, they apply, and if they apply for a 3-year grant, would they need to renew every year, or would it be okay until the end of that 3-year cycle? And so essentially, once you apply, and let's say you apply for a 3-year grant, or the implementation of your project is for 3 years, you do not need to reapply each year. You would get 3 years of funding, assuming that you're meeting the regular reporting requirements and performing on the grant as you've stated, and as we come to agreement. So assuming you're meeting your reporting obligations, you would not need to apply within that 3-year time frame, whatever time frame you apply for the grant. And for large grants, that's up to 5 years.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Another just detail, as folks look at this material that we've released and provide feedback, is that these are the draft application questions and scoring criteria really just for the first round of funding for this $8 million that we'll be releasing and an open period starting in August. We do anticipate that this will change, and we'll learn from this, and it'll be a somewhat iterative process as we go into future funding rounds. So I guess just be aware of that this might look different for future application periods as well. I think I saw a hand raise. Maybe it was a clap. I don't know. There's icons and then hand raises. All right. See a lot of thank yous, and yeah, you're all very, very welcome, and thank you so much for being able to spend this time with us. And again, feel free to reach out if you do have additional questions. I'll put our contact screen up there. And yeah, if you do have additional feedback or questions, please do reach out. And also, we will be having, as Sam said, another webinar. And yeah, we really look forward to getting your feedback in the survey through whatever avenue you'd like to provide your input. So.
And the date on the next webinar is going to be next Tuesday, the 23rd at 9 a.m. And so we'll post that information on our website here shortly. Okay.
All right.
All right.
Well, I think we'll probably stay on for maybe just a minute or two left. It seems like folks are dropping off, which is totally fine. Go get some lunch. Spend a little time outside. I see sunshine out there.
All right. I think it's fair to close this out.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.